Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll take you through a speed run of all the business news stories you need to know about. From Cairo to Johannesburg and Lagos to Nairobi, we have you covered. Here's what's coming up. The Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa conference opens in Addis Ababa with a heavy focus on climate change and food security. We'll also be live in the Ethiopian capital with perspectives on what can be done to avert the damage from climate change and food security. And VAT Uganda is stopping tobacco purchases in the country. Let's start, however, with the Ebola epidemic in West Africa. It is putting harvests at risk and sent food prices soaring right across the region. The Food and Agriculture Organization now warns that the problem will intensify in coming months. The FAO has issued a special alert for Liberia, Sierra Leone and Guinea. These are the three countries worst affected by the outbreak. Restrictions on people's movements and the establishment of quarantine zones to contain the spread of the disease has led to panic buying, food shortages and price hikes. Rice and maize production is scaled back, and the selling of cash crops like palm oil, cocoa and rubber has all been affected. Both the World Food Programme and the FAO have approved an emergency programme to deliver about 65,000 tons of food to people affected by Ebola. Now, small-scale farmers right across Africa are already struggling to adapt to climate change, and it's set to become even worse in coming years. According to the 2014 African Agriculture Status Report, farmers are overwhelmed by rapidly rising temperatures and more erratic rainfall patterns. The report notes that climate change could increase the number of malnourished people in sub-Saharan Africa by nearly 40% over the next 35 years, from 223 million today to 355 million by 2050. Shifting climate conditions also lower the concentration of mineral nutrients like iron and zinc in plants, and that in turn could intensify the already acute problem of nutrient deficiency in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, the changes can also make it quite difficult to grow basic food crops as climate shifts exceed what crops can tolerate. The study recommends adapting to climate change to ensure food security for Africa moving forward. Now, Africa is capable not only of feeding itself, but also producing a surplus for export. That is the theory, and much needs to be done before agricultural output in practice actually does reach that level. Now, experts and policymakers meeting at the Africa Green Revolution Forum in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, do agree that both public and private commitment to approved solutions and political support are all necessary to unlock the continent's potential. CCTV's Girum Chal is at the summit who filed this report.
1,000 participants and more than 60 countries are represented here on the African Green Revolution Forum. The theme is going beyond the tipping point, transforming African agriculture.
This forum, I hope, will have a plan and a target when we shall enhance agricultural productivity and make local food production competitive enough to replace food imports and generate food surpluses to export, and also to position Africa not only to feed itself, but to contribute to feeding the rest of the world.
Since its inception in 2010 in Accra, Ghana, the AGRA forums aspire to achieve the African agenda of feeding itself and making agriculture lead the overall economy.
There is a need for a greater percentage increase in production if the region to become self-sufficient, and this can be achieved only from serious and consistent investments in productivity-enhancing technologies, market and trade integration, including related infrastructure.
The hope now is on the youth of the continent to help in the process of making the best use out of Africa's awesome potential, agriculture.
We have to leave this place and call on our youth to come to agriculture, to build their careers in agriculture, to build prosperity for Africa through agriculture.
Africa is not short of wealth which could be used for the growth of its agriculture sector. More than 60% of its land is still arable, waiting for investors and, more importantly, smallholder farmers to utilize it. The Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program, CAADP, builds on a decade-old promise by AU member states to emphasize agriculture in their budgets. Only 10 countries can be put as exceptions. For the rest, this has not happened. The hope is forums like the African Green Revolution will help nations to be much more committed for the agri-centered change. Grumjala, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Let's get the latest on the conference from Jane Keo. She's part of the team that's covering the Agro Forum this year from the Ethiopian capital. Jane, over a decade ago, African countries committed themselves to spending at least 10% of their budget every year on agriculture. What results has this program brought about?
Well, Rama, those results have been varied. Up until now, only a handful, several countries have actually lived up to that commitment. And these are countries like Ethiopia, Malawi, Burkina Faso, and Rwanda, which has actually come up with several programs to sort of support the farmers there and try and uplift their livelihoods. And a case in point, an example, is the 1 cow per household per family policy, which is actually having a positive impact in Rwanda. Now, other countries are of course lagging behind in this. Some experts believe it has to do with government still looking at agriculture more of a development and not a business venture. Now, that said, Rama, it is mostly its incentives like reducing the cost of fertilizers that have the most impact.
Indeed, Jane, Agro also has argued that depleted soils cost African farmers at least $4 billion a year in lost productivity. That's a huge number. What's being done to remedy this?
I'm sorry, Rama, I can't hear you well.
Let me just repeat that. AGRA has argued that depleted soils cost African farmers at least $4 billion in lost productivity. What's being done to remedy that?
Well, several things have been suggested, Rama, and one of these things is farmer education on sustainable utilization of the resource they have at hand, which is land. And then there's the introduction of policy that sees farmers being presented with inputs like fertilizers to help maintain soil fertility. Now, if that fails, in the absence of this, it has been proven that simple practices like intercropping of legumes and cereals can actually resolve this issue.
Indeed. Finally, Jane, up to 80% of Africa's food is produced by smallholder farmers, and the bulk of those are women. Do we have any idea how big a loss in productivity we incur due to the obstacles in property rights and access to finance and inputs which women across Africa face?
Well, Rama, there really aren't any concrete statistics to sort of capture the plight of the African woman farmer, but it is a well-known fact that at least 80%, now at least that's what some reports say, that 80% of those people engaged in farming in Africa are female. Now, that said, when you factor in the skewed land ownership and rights systems that often relegate this woman, the African woman farmer, into a mere meek observing role, you sort of see there's a disconnect in terms of and a challenge in terms of this woman accessing credit and modern technology. And this is an issue that has dominated the talks. Yesterday, it came up today during the opening of the conference where delegates are calling for more support for this woman if the green revolution is to be achieved.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for that. That's CCTV's Jane Keo live from Addis Ababa. She'll be covering the Agro conference, and we'll have more on this program for you tomorrow. Now, public-private partnerships are often touted as an integral part of efforts to boost the productivity of the African farmer. However, a new report by Oxfam is warning about a rise in such partnerships across Africa. It's dubbed moral hazard, and the report says that large-scale partnerships with the private sector could end up undermining land rights, boosting inequality, and damaging the environment.
We understand that private sector investment is absolutely essential for Africa, and we'd encourage private sector investment both from African countries and smallholder farmers themselves, as well as larger multinational companies. But the quality of that investment is key rather than just the quantity. So we call for government regulation, which will ensure that company investments do no harm, but can also do more good. And in terms of public sector investment, these remain vital towards achieving food security goals and poverty reduction.
Quick run through equity markets. There are broad gains across the board except for Nigeria. The all-share index down by about a third. With respect to equities in Kenya, Safaricom did hit a high of about 13.40 a share, pulled back close at about 13.15. Centum, on the other hand, it was part of a consortium that won a tender to build a 1 gigawatt coal-fired plant at the coast. It is 56% higher in the year to date. BAT Uganda will stop buying tobacco locally. We'll tell you why. And on the other end of the stick, e-cigarettes are making waves. We'll tell you why. Africa is on the move. It's home to 7 of the world's 10 fastest growing economies.
From small businesses to large-scale enterprises, hear directly from entrepreneurs behind the story. It's about putting you in the picture so you know where Africa fits in the global context.
Global Business, weekdays at this time on CCTV Africa.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. BAT Uganda will stop buying tobacco leaf from farmers within the country in 2015. And its management says it just wants to focus on selling cigarettes. So what exactly does that mean to farmers and to the government in Uganda? In What's Hot Tonight, Michael Beleke goes in search of some answers.
BAT Uganda says it will enter into an agreement with Alliance One International, a global player in the tobacco industry, to provide future tobacco leaf requirements from Uganda. The firm says it's not closing operations in Uganda, but rather changing focus to its cigarette selling business.
I see it as positive. In terms of government revenues, up until this year, all government revenues have come out of the cigarette business. Excise, VAT, corporate tax have mainly come out of the cigarette business, and those are anticipated to continue.
BAT is one of Uganda's top taxpayers, with the leaf business contributing the biggest amount in its revenue base. Last year, the company paid about $30 million in taxes, holding a market share of 70% of the cigarette business. Tobacco firm BAT is leaving the tobacco buying business at a time when the Ugandan parliament is considering proposals to introduce stringent measures on the production and sale of tobacco products. Anti-tobacco campaigners see the bill as a watershed moment with significant consequences. Tobacco companies work with over 60,000 farmers in the East African country.
Tobacco growing, yes, is lucrative, but it's lucrative for the tobacco companies like BAT and others, not for our farmers. So I wouldn't mind before the companies pulled out and our farmers are supported to grow other income generating crops and engage in other enterprises.
However, Dr. Barrio Musi says the decision by BAT to pull out of the tobacco buying business in Uganda is merely blackmail.
This legislation does not ban the growing of tobacco, does not ban smoking, does not in any way stop the industry from doing its business. It's only creating an environment to regulate the whole business and the trade of tobacco.
Last year, the tobacco company closed its 74-year-old processing plant in Kampala, moving it to neighboring Kenya, where, according to officials, the costs of doing business were lower. Michael Baleke, CCTV, Kampala.
Away from the supply side of the tobacco market, and the other end of the spectrum for consumers is a relatively new product, the e-cigarette. It's little known across Africa, but it's all the rage in China and some Western markets. Sales and market share are both heading up in the last 2 years. Industry observers see electronic cigarettes could eventually be more popular than the conventional ones by 2020. And the WHO is now calling for the regulation of e-cigs. Here's Peter Okaba with more.
In a long-awaited report that will be debated by member states, the United Nations Health Agency urged a range of regulatory options, including banning manufacturers from making health claims, such as that e-cigarettes help people quit smoking, until they provide convincing, supporting scientific evidence.
Underlying reasons for regulation are really to impede then the promotion of these products to non-smokers and youth, and really to minimize the health risks to both users and non-users of e-cigarettes and related products, to absolutely prohibit unsubstantiated health claims, and then absolutely to prevent the tobacco industry from undermining the great success that we've seen in tobacco control.
The uptake of e-cigarettes, which use battery-powered cartridges to produce a nicotine-laced vapor, has rocketed in the last 2 years. But there is a fierce debate about their risks. Because they are so new, there is lack of a long scientific evidence to support their safety, and some fear they could be a gateway to nicotine addiction and tobacco smoking.
The report indicates that there's no sufficient evidence as to whether electronic cigarettes help or not smokers to quit smoking.
But his claims were roundly dismissed by those in the industry, including smoker turned e-cigarette evangelist Victor Kaufman, who now owns and runs a boutique in central Paris.
I think that a ban on smoking e-cigarettes in public places is an error. It's an error for two reasons. One, no scientific argument justifies this measure, and more particularly, banning it in public places likens the e-cigarette to real cigarettes, which is a mistake. In the minds of users, it will be seen as just as dangerous.
Despite the fierce debate, the e-cigarette is still small fry. For most, e-cigarettes account for less than 1% of global sales in the $780 billion industry. But it's where the companies see opportunity. Shane McGill is a tobacco analyst at Euromonitor.
In the future, things like e-cigarettes and cigarette alternative type products will become increasingly important for the tobacco industry as consumers in Western markets are looking for healthier alternatives. They're also looking for, they're becoming increasingly price sensitive as tobacco consumers as well.
Heated debate is expected at the WHO meeting in October, with scientists divided over the risks and potential benefits of the controversial product. For now, it remains just what it has been, a $3 billion industry in the hands of global tobacco giants. Peter Akaba, CCTV.
Right then, quick run through commodity prices. The story really has remained broadly the same for most of the commodities that we track here. Crude oil prices, slight recovery over there. Still a few concerns about supply, of course, in Libya. Cocoa prices also heading north, up at 200 basis points today, 31.80 a ton. We'll be looking at Ethiopia's drive to boost its tourism sector when we come back. And we'll also be delving deep into Kenya's move to grow business links with the rest of the world. KEPSA CEO is in studio with us shortly. Welcome back. Now, the Kenyan Private Sector Alliance has, pretty much like the Kenyan government, been on a fairly aggressive campaign to woo investors into East Africa's biggest economy. Now, the lobby joined the Kenyan President, Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, in the US at the US-Africa Leaders Summit last month, and its members have aggressively sought partnerships with Chinese companies as well. Now, with good reason, KEPSA's agenda primarily focuses on influencing trade policies, as these directly affect the private sector's operations and the economy in general. It's pushing, for example, for the extension of the American-sponsored African Growth and Opportunity Act, as well as the signing of the Economic Partnership Agreement with the EU. Let's get some details on Kenya's economic diplomacy. Carol Kariuki is the CEO of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. She's with me in studio right now. Thank you for your time this evening. With reference to AGOA, what part specifically of that trade deal would you like to see renewed?
We actually would like to see the whole renewal of the AGOA partnership, but I think the key one is the extension of the third country fabric provision, because that expires next year, and that is very key because unless that is renewed, and really what this means is that if you look at where we have our areas where we have the fabrics and where we do the textiles, we have tax-free zones. And we are allowed to import some of the things that go into the fabrics, like zips and buttons that we don't produce in the country, tax-free. But without that, that would mean they would be taxed. And that would make our fabrics more expensive and then less competitive with other fabrics around the world. And so for us, that's very important for that to be renewed fast, even as we look at the extension of the whole AGOA.
But with regard to making the argument for that to American legislators, the argument they could possibly make is, yeah, but that essentially would probably be a backdoor for other big textile manufacturing countries, Bangladesh, China, whatever, to essentially then set up in Africa and ship goods over to the US, and essentially that will be made in China or made in Bangladesh into the US market by stealth. They might see that as a threat.
I know what you're saying, but we see where we do the extensions, the free zones, is where we have the companies have set there, and whatever comes out of there is actually made in Kenya because of the rules of origin. But what has happened in the past and why this extension is important is because of those parts that we don't manufacture. So that does not mean that other countries can come in and manufacture and then to be made in China or made in Bangladesh and get into the US market, because there are other rules that make sure that whatever is done here, everything else, the fabrics and everything else, is what comes out of Kenya. It's not what comes from the other regions.
Let's talk about something else in comparing AGOA to EPAs. The EPAs essentially demand reciprocal market access to the sub-Saharan countries that do sign them. Is there a risk that the Americans might demand something similar with AGOA?
We're hoping not. But if we do, I think we've learned a lot with the EPAs, and so our negotiations will be well informed. And I think trade agreements will continue to be signed. Already one of the trade agreements that we started discussing in the US was the US East Africa Trade Agreement. So the US is already looking at signing a trade agreement with East Africa region as the first trade agreement with Africa. So already that is in the offing.
What exactly would that entail?
Again, this will entail a lot of the things that we're doing under AGOA, but also other areas. You know, there's a lot that we could export and import from the US that is not captured under AGOA. And also, this now will bring East Africa together, and we start looking at it as what we're doing with the EU and look at the whole market as a whole. So again, that's a very exciting opportunity, and so that's something we'll start discussing very soon through the US Trade Pact. And being the first region that they're saying they're going to agree on an agreement with, it's exciting for East Africa, but we will need to be careful. But also, it's a good opportunity. I think when such opportunities come up means that we up our game. So we need to start thinking about our technologies, our equipment, value addition, which is good for business, which is good for jobs in this country, which is good for the wealth creation. So it's a good thing. I think if we look at it and say these guys will benefit from this, then we'll lose where we're coming from.
One quick question with regard to trade issues, especially with regard to the EPA. The deadline for signing that is just weeks away, 1st of October. What needs to be done to get it signed between now and the end of September?
All the documents are ready. As far as we know from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and if you had the CS Amina talking last week, is that all we are waiting is for the European Union Parliament to open, look at our documentation, and say if there's anything that is left. Because as far as we know, I think we've done our best. We've looked at all the clauses, and we're fine to go. So if they come back and they say there's a clause here that needs to be looked at, then we need to create a timeline so that we don't miss the deadline. But as far as we know, and the comfort we have from the government is that we're ready to go.
All right. Yeah. Fortunately, we'll have to leave it there for the time being, but thank you very much for your time this evening. I appreciate it. That's been Carol Kariuki. She's the CEO of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance. She's been with us here in studio. Now, let's take you to Ethiopia, specifically a cute little town of Bishoftu. It's a booming hotspot, really, for the hospitality industry. In the last 5 years alone, 5 resorts have set up shop in the town. In Grassroots tonight, CCTV's Girum Chala explores how this development is contributing to the country's tourism industry.
Elegance and glamour can summarize the hotels and resorts here. All are built surrounding the 7 most beautiful lakes in Bishoftu town.
What attracts tourists here is the quality of the resorts as well as the standards they have. The resorts are built following the natural beauty here. The lakes and the landscape simply attract customers.
The resort business has been blossoming here for the last 5 years. This has got to do with the attractive tourism policy of the nation, which motivated Bishoftu town resident Mekdes and her husband to open this top-notch resort.
Though the growth has been slow in the past, this town is known to be a weekend town for anyone. These days, thanks to modern thinking and the experience we have got from the rest of the world, we thought to join the business and make use of our natural bounty. The investment is making the town a better tourist destination.
There are close to 10 world-class resorts in this small town, and all of them made sure they have the Ethiopian traditional way of building or furnishing houses. Simply, this is where modern married successfully well with tradition.
This is not a new industry here. People are getting used to it. Many of the customers here are more local than foreigners. And though the prices are expensive, they afford them as well.
These hotels and resorts are also becoming providers of the much-needed jobs for the locals here. At the moment, more than 2,000 youths work here. It looks like tourists themselves keep on trooping here, attracted by the beauty of the place.
Look around. It is very nice to be here. It is quiet here on the lake. It is very quiet. We like it.
People are coming. They can relax on the lake. They have a boat. They can fishing. They can do everything. And not only the people are looking to a lot of things, but they need also rest, peace. And therefore, I'm sure that it will be very good.
These waters, the mountains and the pretty resorts around them will surely contribute for the overall motivation of economic growth in Ethiopia. Now, all the hotels and resorts in this beautiful town of Bishoftu have their own association which works for the same common successful goal. That simply means they chose to swim than sing together. Grumjala CCTV at the Lisak Resort, Bishoftu, Ethiopia.
Okay then, on to something a little less luxurious than a swimming pool in Ethiopia. Currencies. Some good news for Ghana. The currency, of course, Cedi, has shown a bit of stability, gaining a bit of traction against the American dollar. Remember, this is a currency that has been in free fall for the last 8 months, down about 40% to the American dollar. Definitely a little stroke of good news over there. And as far as Kenya is concerned, tomorrow, Kenya's Monetary Policy Committee will be meeting. Inflation has gone up. Will they hold rates or will they cut? We'll have to wait and see. Now, tomorrow on Global Business, we'll be staying with the developments in the Agro Forum in Addis Ababa. We'll be live in the Ethiopian capital with a lot more detail on what you should expect. And later on, we'll also be telling you about an increase in vanilla prices. Prices for vanilla have apparently gone up in the global market. That's encouraging Ugandan farmers to grow the crop once again. That's it for this edition of the program. Send your feedback to Global Business Africa at cctv.com. You can also check us out on Facebook and on Twitter. Wherever you are online, we'll definitely be there as well. And that's it for this edition of the program. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in 23 hours. I'm Ramanya.